Title: Fire and Freedom, a War of 1812 story. Prologue. The flames engulfed Washington, D.C., licking at the sky as the British set fire to the Capitol. Smoke and chaos filled the streets. Among the civilians fleeing the city was Ethan Caldwell, a young man with fire in his heart. Watching his homeland burn, he swore an oath. He would fight to defend his country, no matter the cost. Chapter 1. A Divided Nation. Ethan enlisted in the U.S. Army, eager to prove himself. Across the Atlantic, his childhood friend, Thomas Redfern, had joined the British Army, believing in the might of the crown. As war loomed over the young nation, two friends found themselves on opposite sides. Meanwhile, Ethan trained under seasoned officers, learning the brutal realities of war, while Thomas, stationed in Canada, gained a reputation as a fierce leader. Chapter 2. The Battle of Queenston Heights. Ethan's first taste of combat came at Queenston Heights. As American forces struggled to secure a foothold in Canada, he faced the horrors of war firsthand. Thomas, serving as a British lieutenant, led his men in a counterattack. The friends locked eyes across the battlefield, but duty forced their hands. The Americans suffered a defeat, and Ethan barely escaped with his life. His commanding officer was slain, forcing him to step up and lead his fellow soldiers to safety. Chapter 3. A Dangerous Mission. Determined to turn the tide, Ethan volunteered for a perilous mission, crossing enemy lines to gather intelligence. Disguised as a fur trader, he infiltrated a British outpost, discovering their plan to strike Baltimore. But his deception was uncovered, and he found himself face to face with Thomas, who had the power to either turn him in or let him go. Torn between duty and friendship, Thomas gave Ethan a chance to escape, but it came at great personal risk. Chapter 4. The War at Sea. As Ethan struggled to evade capture, the war raged at sea. The USS Constitution engaged the HMS Guerriere in a brutal naval clash. Cannon fire roared as American sailors fought for dominance on the waves, proving that their fledgling navy was a force to be reckoned with. News of the victory inspired the troops, giving them hope amid despair. Ethan, making his way back to American lines, witnessed another naval skirmish, this time between the HMS Shannon and the USS Chesapeake, which resulted in a tragic American loss. Chapter 5. Brothers in Chains. Ethan was captured and sent to a British prison camp. To his surprise, Thomas visited him, torn between loyalty to his country and friendship. Thomas secretly provided Ethan with information about an upcoming British assault, setting the stage for one of the war's most decisive battles. Though they were enemies, their bond remained unbroken. Meanwhile, Ethan's fellow prisoners planned an escape, and he had to decide whether to risk everything or await a potential prisoner exchange. Chapter 6. The Burning of Washington. In August 1814, the British launched their attack on Washington, setting the city ablaze. Ethan, having escaped imprisonment, returned home to witness the devastation firsthand. He aided in evacuating civilians and saw his childhood home in ruins. Thomas, part of the British forces, felt a deep sense of regret as he watched the destruction unfold. The war was no longer just about duty, it had become personal. Chapter 7. The Battle of Baltimore and the Star-Spangled Banner. Following the destruction of Washington, the British set their sights on Baltimore. Ethan, now serving under Major George Armistead, helped fortify Fort McHenry. The bombardment lasted through the night, and as dawn broke, the American flag still waved. The moment inspired Francis Scott Key to write what would become the Star-Spangled Banner. Ethan, weary but victorious, realized that America's spirit could not be broken. Chapter 8. The Battle of Lundy's Lane. On a dark July night, one of the bloodiest battles of the war erupted at Lundy's Lane. Muskets flashed like lightning, and screams filled the air. Ethan, freed during an American raid, found himself fighting side by side with his comrades, while Thomas led British reinforcements. In the chaos, they crossed paths once more, blades clashing in a desperate fight neither wanted to finish. Injured and separated, both men were forced to confront their own doubts about the war. Chapter 9. espionage and betrayal. As the war neared its climax, both sides turned to espionage. Ethan was assigned to work with American spies in New Orleans, uncovering British strategies. Meanwhile, Thomas was tasked with rooting out spies within the British ranks, leading him into a tangled web of deceit. The two men unknowingly worked against each other, their fates intertwined in a dangerous game. Chapter 10: The Battle of New Orleans. As the war neared its end, the Americans, led by General Andrew Jackson, made a final stand at New Orleans. Against overwhelming odds, Ethan and his fellow soldiers defended the city. The battle was a resounding American victory, securing their independence and solidifying their place as a rising power. Thomas, wounded and disillusioned, questioned everything he had fought for. As he lay on the battlefield, captured by the Americans, he and Ethan met once more, this time with no weapons drawn. Chapter 11: The Treaty of Ghent and Aftermath. News of the Treaty of Ghent reached the battlefield after the fighting had ended, making the Battle of New Orleans technically unnecessary. The war was over, but its consequences lingered. Ethan, now a decorated soldier, struggled to return to civilian life, haunted by the memories of battle. Thomas, released after the war, returned to England, only to find that his sacrifices had been for an empire that had moved on without him. Epilogue: A New World. With the war over, Ethan and Thomas met one last time, no longer as enemies, but as men shaped by war. Though their countries had drawn them apart, their friendship endured. As they parted ways, they knew that history had changed forever, and so had they. And so, the echoes of war faded, leaving behind the stories of those who had fought for freedom, honor, and the hope of a new future.